Hi, this is your sewing Sherpa Shauna, and I'm going to do a brief but spectacular video on how to do a flat felled seam, because this last month I've had 3 separate people ask me how to do a flat felled seam. They didn't actually ask me how to do a flat felled seam, they asked me, how do you do this kind of seam? Or look at this seam I did, it's a French seam, I've tipped it over and sewed it down. Literally all 3 of them did that, so it's not like just one person did that. And I was just like, well, flat felled seam is what you typically see in your denim jackets, you see in the side seams on your pants, or inseams depending on the manufacturer. Those are flat felled seams. Now, modern factories don't use the traditional methods for flat felled seams. They use a chain stitch machine that has twin needles, and it's got the cones of thread that are feeding the chain area and blah blah blah, because it makes it easy and fast. That's why it takes 12 minutes to sew jeans in a factory and 12 days at home. No, actually just like a day or 2. But flat felled seams, so every time someone asks me, I'm like, okay, I'll send you a tutorial on YouTube. I'm sure it's out there. Somebody's done a really great tutorial. So I looked for hours. And I found great tutorials. If you're a home sewer and you got a lot of time to put in a ton of pins and clips and press things like this and that, and then cut things like this and that. We don't have time like that here. No. In a factory, you don't do that. So I thought, I will do a quick tutorial on how to do a flat felled seam without the fancy equipment, just a plain straight stitch machine, and not even without the foot, because you can get a foot that will roll for you. You have to make sure you buy the one with the right millimeter, like 4 millimeter or 6 millimeter or 9 millimeter, however wide you want your seam to be. But it will help you with rolling. I don't need help with rolling, but well, I do, but I don't. So here's the thing. I made a mock pattern here, a pair of pants, front and back. They're going to get sewn together at the side with a flat felled seam. So if you're using a home sewing pattern, it's got 5/8 of an inch, and I drew in 5/8 of an inch. It's kind of hard to see, but I drew them in here. I usually use 1/2 inch seams, but 5/8 is fine. So if I'm going to make more than one pair of these, I will actually modify the pattern. Like the pattern on the back, I'm going to trim it down to 1/4 of an inch for that outside seam allowance. If I'm only going to do one, I might just cut it out and then trim it, but I'll trim it before I sew it. I'll trim it before I get over to the machine, because it's easier to trim this flat than it is to like sew the seam and then get in there with your scissors and try and cut it, right? So you just get rid of it before you start sewing. If you know you're going to flat fell the seam, get rid of it, right? So I've just drawn a new cut line 1/4 of an inch away from my old sew line. So basically I'm removing 3/8 of an inch off the pattern and the fabric on the back, because I'm rolling this seam to the back. If I were rolling it to the front, which you wouldn't do, I would take it off the front. So I have trimmed it off now, and these are funny pants. Anyhow, I'm going to put these wrong sides together, not right sides together. So normally in sewing, we're always like right sides together. This time I'm doing wrong sides together. Oh, I didn't double check to see if they had the same height. Anyways, doesn't matter, this is a sample. And instead of lining the 2 edges up, I just trimmed off the back by 3/8, so I need to stagger it in by 3/8. And you can get yourself your seam gauge out and measure it out precisely. I am not going to do that. I can eyeball 3/8. So I'm getting rid of this because I cut it wrong. But anyways, I can eyeball 3/8 pretty good. So there we go, 3/8, right? I'm going to sew my seam at 5/8 though, because I have a 5/8 inch seam allowance. So basically, I'll be sewing 1/4 of an inch from the edge. Now, I find this a little bit clumsy, having 3/8 of an inch to wrap around. I would prefer to only have 1/4, but you might not find it clumsy. Anyways, adjust your seam allowances to make it easy for you. So I've sewn that first seam. And now what I'm going to do is take it over the iron and press it. No, I'm not. You're welcome to. It really will help you if you're not comfortable handling fabrics. But the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it so that it's right side up still. And I'm going to take that extra seam allowance thing and I'm going to wrap it around that 1/4 inch. Now, if you don't understand what I'm doing right now, you need to go and watch a couple YouTube tutorials on flat felled seams, and you need to try out a couple of them using their techniques, because what I'm doing is cutting all sorts of corners, right? So I just wrapped it around, and I used, you'll see I put blue thread on the bottom, and you can't really see it that great because it's dark back here. I need to get some skylights. And then I have white thread on the top, so you can kind of see that white seam. So when I open this up and wrap this around, I'm going to have one row of white and one row of blue, because you'll be seeing your bobbin thread on the top on that seam, and you'll be seeing your top thread on this sew down. So I am sewing really close to that folded edge. So I'm folding this wide seam allowance around the narrow seam allowance, and then I'm running it through really, really close to that edge. And if I had that foot, this would be faster because it would be rolling it for me, and I'm kind of pre-rolling every couple of inches like a hand length. So now what I have here is I have a clean finished edge, right? It's clean finished on this side, and it's clean finished on this side. So there's no raw, like ragged stitch fabric pieces sticking out at all. So if I were doing a shirt sleeve, if I were setting a shirt sleeve, or if I were doing a shirt in general, because shirts don't usually have, you know, like men's tailored shirts usually don't have the flat felled showing on the outside. They would have what we call the run-and felled sewing, stitch sewing on the outside. And it's basically exactly the same technique, except instead of sewing wrong sides together, you're going to sew right sides together. That's it. That's the whole big change. And you got to, you know, think through it. You might want to do it once or twice about which direction you want your seam to go. So like on sleeves, you want the bulk of the seam allowance going out. So when you roll it, you're going to be rolling out into the sleeve, not up into the shoulder. Although I've seen it up in the shoulder before too. Again, the front, you'll actually be rolling a seam allowance to the front on the side seam. So is that the same as this? No, this one, it's to the back. So yeah, you got to kind of think ahead, but it's a really quick and easy way of finishing a seam. And what's also great is it's a super strong seam, which is why they use it in denim and stuff like that. Okay, if you have any questions, I don't know who you're gonna call. Good luck with your flat felds.